welcome back to Between the Pages. I'm your host, Grace Randolph, and joining me once again is Alan Kistler. We're doing our summer run of comics to film, and today we're going to talk about General Zod.
Drew Zod.
Listen, Alan, I got to tell you,
Yeah.
when they were making Man of Steel, and they first started to talk about it, everyone was like, it better not be General Zod.
That was me,
right?
too.
And then they were like, it's General Zod. And the internet was like, God damn it. But then, as we get closer to the movie, suddenly everyone's like, I'm so excited about General Zod.
You know,
Just help me understand, what has turned everyone around?
I think it's what we're seeing in the trailers, and
There's no Zod in the trailer, though.
he's there.
Well,
He's
he
there
yells
with
and says,
the
I'll find your son.
yeah, or at least like I'll find him, whoever he's yelling to. But I think it's a combination of this movie is also looking a lot better to people, so they're willing to take a chance on
They're
whatever
like,
they're
okay,
going to throw at it.
let's see what you got.
Okay,
right?
like this is Superman who's going to kick a little ass, so then no doubt the villain will also be kicking a little ass. So we'll follow with you on this, and I think the fact that it's Michael Shannon
Yeah, well,
has sold a lot of people.
well, sure, it's Michael Shannon. Even I love Michael Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, never mind when he does dramatic readings of sorority letters. Like, the fact is, he brings a lot of great to the table. He can do a really good villain.
Yeah, General Zod needs a hobby. Maybe he, you don't know what he's doing. A lot of time in the Phantom Zone.
Zod just dramatically reads bad internet memes.
Yeah, he's trying to find out what Earth is like. He's like, let's do some research. But Zod, I think the reason that Zod is so popular, well, first of all, it's no secret that Superman has kind of a crappy rogues gallery.
Yeah, no.
I'll say it.
For a guy who's been around as long as he is,
Yes.
it's ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous how few really good villains you've got. You've got memorable villains here and there, but very few of them like really work on an epic scale or give you this sense of, well, thank God Superman was there because no one else could have stopped him. Like no one thinks that about the prankster or the
that's
toy
great.
man.
Yeah.
Like, well, thank God Superman could stop the toy man and his giant rubber ducky of death.
I think you might have totally hit the nail on the head there because, I'm a Lex Luthor fan, but it seems that the fan base has turned against Luthor in the past few years.
I mean, I
the
think
purple suit didn't help him, I'm sure. But
Well, sure.
why do you think it was?
I think also we got Luthered out. It's
A lot of Luther. President
there's a
Luthor.
lot of Luther. He was actually the star of Action Comics for several.
I remember that. Yeah.
Now that was a good story. Paul
It got
Cornell.
weird though.
Yeah, it got weird. I like Paul Cornell's writing. I thought it was a good story. But the fact is, it did kind of point out, like, wait, this is Action Comics, and Luthor is supposed to be one of many villains who plague Superman. I think also Mark Waid and a few other people have brought up that if you make Luthor a little bit too cool or too smart for where the police really never catch him, it really makes Superman look ineffective.
That's great.
And I see the point there, where it's like there's such a careful balance between Luthor being really good at being a bad guy
That's hilarious.
and actually outshining Superman.
But we're not talking about Lex Luthor. We're talking about his replacement,
Yes,
General Zod.
General Zod, which automatically I think also what people are starting to remember now is if Zod is there, then you have a villain in the movie that Superman can punch.
That's Zod's claim to fame. Right? I mean, that's why he was created, and I think that's why he sticks around. And that and the fight. Superman could technically punch anyone. But it'll go a couple rounds.
Yeah. No, and you've also got this guy who automatically has a different kind of vibe than Superman because it's not that he's one of several Phantom Zone criminals who...
He's the Phantom Zone
He's
criminal.
the Phantom Zone criminal because he was a military leader.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it's important to establish. He had a coup against Krypton.
Yeah.
So when is he introduced? How long has Zod been around?
Zod is introduced in the Silver Age. So he came around the time of Brainiac and all that jazz. It actually started off in a Superboy comic when we learned about General Zod. He was a Phantom Zone inductee, but he wasn't introduced with the Phantom Zone. We had learned about the Phantom Zone beforehand. We learned about the original Phantom Zone villain, Jax
For anyone who doesn't know, it's the negative zone, like in Marvel. It's like an alternate dimension where it's basically like they stick all their junk and their prisoners.
I mean, it's varied over the years. Originally, when the Phantom Zone shows up, it's called a Twilight Dimension, which has no vampires who want to be your boyfriend, but
Rod Serling is there.
Yeah, and it's this place where you don't physically exist. You basically
Oh,
are.
you're like a ghost. That's why it becomes the Phantom Zone.
Right,
Yeah.
right. This was Krypton's prison for like the worst of the worst. It was
Australia.
It's exactly Australia. And
But they never did anything with it. Damn it.
and basically, they would be there to just really reflect on their crimes. That's all you can really do in the Phantom Zone is reflect on your crimes.
But not Zod. Well, he's like, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, which sadly is, a lot of these guys. And so, of course, it becomes this way to bring in Kryptonian supervillains, even though Krypton's gone. Because, like, okay, Krypton's gone.
Oh, yeah, Krypton exploded, but not the Phantom Zone.
Not the Phantom Zone. And it's just like, and even worse, well, that means that the people, of all the people who you would want to survive Krypton, the people who are still alive are the terrorists,
Yeah.
the mass murderers, and the guys who try to take over our world. Like, crap. And they're all collected together.
Well, was Zod ever really popular in the comics before Superman 2?
He had his popularity. He had a few good fights, but usually it was not him alone. You would have different Phantom Zone villains coming out at the same time, and maybe he would be in charge.
He'd be one of them, yeah.
Maybe Jack Sewer would be in charge, but it was a group effort of. There aren't any comics back in the day where it's just like, this issue, General Zod. It would be, this issue, the Phantom Zone villains.
And then General Zod would be like, hello.
Right, he would be one
yeah.
of them.
Okay.
And so that was kind of, he really got a new appeal through the movies.
Yes, because, okay, you mentioned Jax-Ur, right?
Right.
And it's Ursa, right?
Ursa was introduced in the movie.
Okay, so he has like his cronies.
Right.
He's one of the few supervillains who I think, besides Joker and Harley Quinn, but who has like a set. They're more like known as a threesome.
Right, and that's because of the movie primarily that we got to have this image of Zod with a huge guy and a deadly woman, and they do have
Like any guy, he had like he had his muscle and his lady.
yeah, and they do have like some equivalents in the comics, but Ursa and Non were new characters made up for the movies, and then finally Jeff Johns brought them into the comics
Yes.
a few years ago.
Yeah, that was really a big deal because Jeff Johns really brought them a lot in. Well, first, he created a really interesting story. I mean, he made Ursa Zod's second in command.
Right.
Right? So she was also a huge member of the coup.
Right.
And then Non. He made him kind of like Lenny from Mice and Men.
Non, we find out, was like Jor-El's teacher. Basically, like he was like a mentor to Jor-El. He was this incredible scientist who Jor-El trusted, and he started speaking out against Krypton's government, and so they quieted him. They made him mute. They took away so much of his thinking ability. And
Oh, they didn't just hit the mute button. They took out his general processor.
Right. he became this hulking brute, and in Jeff Johns' comics, that actually was kind of the turning point for Zod, where he finally is just like, you know what, our government is pretty corrupt. I should be in charge.
Yeah, well, that's, Jeff Johns creating more of a gray area. Being
Right.
like, is this guy really horrible? But I think the most interesting thing that Johns did with this introduction, and he really took his time, which is refreshing in comics, especially
Yes.
these days, was Christopher Kent.
Yes, I loved Chris.
So let's talk about that.
So in a story, Last Son of Krypton, Superman finds...
Beautiful story. Kubert's drawing it.
So wonderful.
It's gorgeous.
So wonderful. You can pick up the trade.
But we're going to spoil it for you in a second. So.
This is the opening premise. This
Okay.
is the opening premise. Like, Superman finds a kid who is speaking Kryptonian, and initially, like, he doesn't want the government to take this kid away and study him, so he decides, my parents took in an alien kid from Krypton, raised him, taught him right, and he became a great guy. Why don't I do that?
With Lois. And
With
it
Lois.
solves the whole can they have a kid problem as well.
Right.
Instant family. Now, I think in hindsight, clearly that's a bad idea to give Superman a child, and that really ages him up. I think you don't have to be a comic book editor, or maybe you should be, to see that that's going to not work out.
Well, it's something that comics constantly wrestle with, of like, how old do you want the person to be, and also how much responsibility do you want them to have outside of being a superhero? Because you do create a dramatic tension, which at times can be really good, and then at other times can get very tiresome.
Well, it's a beautiful idea to have this, paying it forward with the adoption. And at the same time the movie was coming out, Superman Returns,
Right.
where there was also a kid. So they're like, oh, he has a kid too.
Right, and there was there's something to be said that was kind of the next area to go, because at that point Superman and Lois had been married for almost a decade,
And it was boring.
and it was just like, okay, we've seen them married now. What
Yeah.
else? And what else is you change their lives? You bring in another person that they have to worry about.
And he was named Christopher after Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, which
was
was a really nice touch.
Yeah, I thought that was really nice.
Yeah. Now
So,
here's where we start
spoiler, yeah.
spoiling. Here's where we start spoiling.
Yeah, sorry.
So it turned out that Christopher didn't come from Krypton per se. He came from the Phantom Zone.
Because he was the child of
Zod!
and Ursa.
And that they had figured out a way to physically exist. There was an area of the Phantom Zone that actually maintained physical
That's
substance.
hilarious. Okay.
Yeah.
They're like, what should we do with this? I know. But then I think also Jeff Johns did a big job of establishing why Zod and Ursa were horrible parents.
Yes.
You know, he made Ursa, like she was the crazy one.
Yeah.
She became, like the sadistic,
Yeah.
Torturer. And then also another interesting thing was that Christopher Kent started to age rapidly.
Right. Because he was born in this dimension where the laws of physics don't quite work in the right way.
And teenage characters are far more interesting.
Oh, it's actually a common trope in science fiction that if you give someone a kid,
Age 'em up.
eventually circumstances happen to age them up.
So the interesting thing they do with this character, though, Chris Kent, even further, is that when he grows up, he gets a girlfriend, right? Kryptonian or?
Yeah, Kryptonian and Thera Akvar. At that point, they had enlarged the city of Kandor, and Thera Akvar was there. And she and Chris Kent form a mental connection.
And they become Flamebird and Nightwing.
Yes.
Which are weren't they like mythological heroes on Krypton or something?
Yeah, it's changed a couple times. Originally, there was a Silver Age story where Superman and Jimmy Olsen basically wound up on Kandor, and different things happened where it was necessary for them to fight some crime. But on Kandor, there were conditions like Krypton, so Superman didn't have his powers on Kandor.
Oh.
So he and Jimmy decided to model themselves after Batman and Robin. And there are no bats or robins on Krypton, apparently.
What a nice thing to do for Superman. Batman's like, aw.
So they named themselves after two Kryptonian animals, and that was the original idea. Later on, when continuity got changed and stuff, they changed it to, it was a mythological hero named Nightwing and a mythological hero named Flamebird.
What happened to Chris Kent and Thor Akvar? I stopped reading because I didn't love the story eventually.
I mean, they wound up getting into these cosmic battles because they actually, in the new version of events, Greg Rucka and Jeff Johns and all, when they were doing this whole new Krypton story and then the war with Krypton, they had this idea of like, the original Nightwing and Flamebird were these cosmic forces that inspired a lot of Kryptonian mythology. So it turned out that they became hosts of this power. And
like the Phoenix.
A little bit.
So they went off.
A little bit, yeah.
So let's go back to Zod. You have this picture up here from the Jeff Johns run, and it's just like, I think that's really all Zod is right now. The dude with the goatee, standing there with his cronies being like, where's Superman?
That's become a thing, and it's definitely been interpreted into other media also, because on top of Terrence Stamp movie that made the goatee look so good, there's also Callum Blue in Smallville. We actually met two Zods in the Smallville TV show. There was a Phantom who had once been Zod, but his body had basically decayed, and now he was just a phantom, literally, in the Phantom Zone. And he took over Lex Luthor's body at one point, so basically Lex was playing Zod.
Yeah.
But then we met a second Zod who was a clone of the original
Oh.
one. And he was a younger man, played by Callum Blue. And he was very interesting because it was a while in him coming to his idea of we should take over. And you had all these conversations. So he and Superman actually became friends.
Because he's like, we're similar.
And you got some really interesting insight from him. Like he would talk about how humanity seemed flawed even in their mythology. Like he read the Bible, he read Genesis. And he was just saying, these people want knowledge and they're thrown out. Like, I don't understand. So your human race doesn't like that? What a different from our mythology where people must get knowledge to come back to paradise and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
that's fantastic.
So Smallville did an amazing job with Zod. And eventually he does take on more the what we now think of as the classic look.
Well, you know, that's the classic rebel look.
Yeah.
I don't care about laws, including clean-shavenness.
And that was what Smallville went for. If you look at him, he did start to have kind of a road warrior, revolutionary, piratical look to him. And I thought that was really cool. I really liked what Smallville
I actually
did.
kind of prefer this because it doesn't have the posturing of the Terrence Stamp Zod. You know, that's very much like, I was the main cheese on Krypton, so diplomatic rules apply, what's up?
Right.
You know, like, this seems very much like a subversive, you know, like Superman is like, I'm a very public hero, and this is the idea of Zod being a very private villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is cool, another opposite.
And actually, even Terrence Stamp, we had two versions because we had the theatrical cut of Superman 2, but then we also had the Richard Donner cut later. And if you look at the Richard Donner cut, even when the scenes are the same, he's using a different take. And Terrence Stamp in the Richard Donner cut is much more sinister, much more quiet. And I generally prefer that for Zod.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think he's the kind of cat that doesn't have to announce his power all the time.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when you look at it that way, you know, what do you take from Zod? Is Zod just a traditional, I hate Superman, I want to destroy him villain, let's fight it out? Or is it like, I like this idea of exploring, like, this could have been what happened if Superman had come to Earth as an adult.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you should explore it. I think that's made it so much more interesting because if it just is, well, your daddy was mean to me, so I'm
sins
gonna
of
kill
the
you.
father.
Yeah,
you know.
then that gets played out after a while.
Well, it's interesting. I've heard some rumors about Man of Steel that Clark Kent's character, you know, Kal-El, was a unique child even on Krypton.
Yeah, which is worrying me a little bit because it sounds a lot like the John Peters idea from years back when John Peters was a producer.
Oh, this is the infamous.
Right. This
is when Kevin Smith, yes.
Like, they tried to make a Superman movie in the 90s.
And John Peters started out as a hairdresser and became a producer.
Yes.
So
because in Hollywood you can fail up.
And get your hands on Superman.
Yeah. So he had these certain ideas, and one was he kept asking, does the planet have to blow up? And yes, because it's Superman. But he had this idea of like that the planet doesn't blow up, so you would still have all these, never mind the Phantom Zone, just there are a lot of people still on Krypton, it's still there, and that Superman is sent away because he's essentially the child of a prophecy, and he's going to overthrow the bad guys.
Yeah.
And so he's sent away, and so eventually it would be setting up for, in the sequel, he would come back.
You know, that's a really fascinating idea because we haven't seen Krypton explode. We see a lot of explosions in the trailer, but that could be an attack.
Right, and also there was a comment, I think it was made by Michael Shannon, but it might have been made by Snyder. I forget who exactly said it, but there was a comment about Zod's motivations that a lot of people picked up on, like, well, wait, what does that mean? Because he said basically, you know, part of Zod really thinks Superman could do a lot of good, so he wants to take him back to Krypton. And people were like, well, did you misspeak there? Like,
did he say back to Krypton?
Yeah, he said like back. So people have been like, did you mean that literally? So is this following the John Peters idea that Krypton doesn't blow up? Or do you just mean the Kryptonian culture back to... Because people misspeak sometimes.
Well, you know, that's like a misthought.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, this is going to be very interesting. I mean, you're getting to a degree where I feel like this could be an interesting story, but it's not Superman.
Right.
You know, but because I think when you see him say, I will find him, I mean, who else could he be talking about?
Right.
But Kal-El.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think Michael Shannon's a really fascinating actor, a very compelling actor. I'm very excited for him. I think I worry about Man of Steel because I think Henry Cavill is the least interesting actor in the film. I hope I'm proven wrong. I like Kevin Costner, I like Amy Adams, I like Michael Shannon quite a bit. Russell Crowe, I feel I've seen Russell Crowe play this role like a lot. But it's interesting. I mean, we'll see. You might be right because it says in the trailer he'll be a god to them. You know, and I'm sure we assume he's referring to the Earth, the yellow sun. But that's an interesting, you know, we'll see. I mean,
we'll find out.
I mean, they're getting pretty good at hiding twists on these movies, I feel. Well, what do you think of this, before we go, what do you think of, what are you hoping to see with Michael Shannon? I mean, he's got his cronies, he seems to have a couple of them, you know, and he has the Superman look to his armor.
Right.
I don't know how I feel about the bowl cut. It's very Caesar, you know, it's very Roman.
It is, and You know, and it's an interesting line to play with it. I hope, you know, we've seen him shouting, certainly in the trailer, and so I'm okay with Zod shouting and stuff, but I do hope that it's more of a, I don't have time for politics and stuff like that, I just get the job done. I hope to see that kind of a militaristic attitude as opposed to the more flavorful, more scene-chewing Terrence Stamp stuff, where he's like pontificating.
Yeah, I would like to see some subtlety too. I mean,
No,
this
I
one
agree.
photo, I mean, like he's just like, you can just see Zod being like, this is gonna be awesome,
Yeah.
we're gonna have a great smackdown. I think that comic book movies are evolving to be a little more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
You know, like what's at stake in this fight, not just like, this is gonna be awesome,
Yeah.
you know? So we'll see.